Well, welcome back to Common Sense Conversations. I'm Eric.
And I'm Matt.
And we're excited to be here today. So Matt, I've mentioned before that I taught English in China,
Yep.
right? And when you're in China, just fun things follow you around, it seems like, especially when you're foreign. There's always something crazy going on. So anyway, a big thing that happens in China is that they really take societal constructs and your position in society in very, very seriously, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why over there people respect their elders quite a bit more than they do here, unfortunately. And so they're always trying to the school that I taught at, they were always trying to, in essence, show us off, right? And hey, look, we have some native English speakers from the United States, and so it's kind of this thing, right? And so we went to this this play. It was this big community play, and so they took us along, and which I loved. I thought it was a great thing. I got to experience all sorts of things. But out of this play, I don't quite remember what it was about. I couldn't really speak Chinese at all, right? I could say, hey, where's the bathroom? But that's about it, right? And so I sat next to this other native Chinese English teacher, right? Okay. And so she was kind of explaining it as we went along.
Okay.
And it was fun. It was an enjoyable experience. And then halfway, so now we're at intermission, and this couple gets up on the stage, and he's doing this magic show. And I thought, okay, this is kind of fun. And so then the first thing he does is he says, hey, we need a volunteer from the audience, right?
and love to volunteer, right?
And so he starts walking down the aisle, and nobody's raising their hand. I mean, this auditorium, it's big and it's full, completely full. And nobody's raising their hands. Two people jump off the stage and they start walking down the aisle, and nobody's volunteering and nobody's raising their hands. So I turn over to this English teacher,
colleague, right?
Rebecca, okay, is her name. I say, so can I volunteer? And she says, she kind of looks at me weird, like, I guess, if you want. And so I raised my hand, and I'm kind of near the back, and so they have to pass a lot of people to get to me.
Did you say that these situations just seek you out, or do you seek them out?
I might be a little bit of both.
Okay.
And so I raised my hand, and they call on me, and I don't think that they knew who they were calling on initially. So
the light-colored hair, light skin, dark auditorium.
It was kind of a dark auditorium.
They couldn't tell who he was. Okay. Very good.
Yeah. So anyway, so I get up and I run up to the stage, and this guy is up there, and he starts to explain this magic show, and he looks at me, and I said, nope. I have no idea what you're saying, right? I don't know at all anything that you're saying. And so he has to basically show me in the simplest terms what he wanted me to do, right? And so he has this...
the audience laughing.
Yeah, they're laughing, and we're just having a good time. But so he pulls out these handkerchiefs, and he has me hold it. And so he shows me with his hands, this is what I want you to do. And so I kind of follow along and do what he wants, right? Yeah. And then he cuts my handkerchief. I just have to hold it so that it has the middle sticking out. So he cuts mine, and then he cuts his. And then he has me show mine, and it's got this hole in the middle. And then he shows his, and there's no hole in the middle. He cut it, right? And so it's kind of this fun thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, and so it's and afterwards they gave me this little sign book, and it was fun.
Cool.
But my point is that it was funny, but at the same time he had to show something that was it wasn't too complex, but it was something that in order to complete this magic show, in order for everybody to understand. Yeah. The gist of the show, he had to really break it down into simple terms. And I think that's what we plan on doing today, is really breaking it down. So I'm excited by this show because hopefully it's going to help everybody understand in very simple terms why this is important, how to proceed, what to do, what's the next steps, and where to go from here.
Yeah, well, that's a great story. I didn't know exactly where the story was going, and he always seems to get there, though, and it ends up being a great intro. This one of my favorite PowerPoint presentations to go through with groups when I teach this concept is entitled "The How and the Why of Your Personal Financing System," and there are some concepts that we're all interested in, some principles that we hold dear, and one of those principles is freedom. independence, financial freedom. And the people who are hungry for those truths and hungry to live those out in their lives are the kinds of people who are drawn to this concept. But when it comes right down to it, we have to get into the details, right?
Yeah.
People will go to a magic show because they want to be entertained. They want wholesome entertainment. That's the value they all hold in common. And then you've got to get right down to the details and explain things out. So we'll go through this presentation today, and normally with questions and whatnot, this is normally 45 minutes to an hour. So if we break this into 2 podcasts and maybe go through the whys and then get into the hows and get right down to the nitty gritty, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. So for those of you just listening to this, as we go through, and Eric and I are going to interact in such a way that hopefully it's easy for you to follow along. On camera, you can see the laptop that I've got here, of course. So my whole goal is to illustrate some concepts, and when these concepts are applied, folks will be able to easily recapture hundreds, if not thousands of dollars back into of money that they've spent.
So I have to jump in there. What do you mean by recapture? Recapture, I mean, it sounds like you're letting go of some fish and then you're recapturing them. What does recapture mean?
Okay. Well, let's try to use that fish analogy, see if this works. All of us are earning money from some source, right? So we have maybe 10 fish a month, 20 fish a month, 100 fish a month coming into our nets, right? But then when we pay the cable bill, we take one of those fish and we pay the cable bill, right? When we go buy a car, we take 100 of those fish and we go buy a car with 100 fish, and luckily everybody wants fish. So that works out okay. Now, if there were a way for us to replenish our fish supply in such a way that those fish would multiply on their own, and we could replenish the fish supply with some of those fish that we had spent on cars and cable bills and vacations and other things like that, then that's exactly what I mean, actually.
So in other words, we're putting them into a place or a system where they're easily recaught.
Yeah.
Where they're readily, where they're naturally in a position where we can recapture.
Easily replaced, recaptured, yeah. And the great thing about the pond where the fish are hanging out is that it's a very healthy pond. And so those fish propagate on their own. Oh, nice. And we end up with more and more and more fish without
so
doing anything.
Heaven.
It's like fish heaven, yeah.
All right.
Fish are in there doing what rabbits do. Okay. So, and the more fish a person has to start with, that person who is receiving 100 fish a month versus 10 fish a month, they have more fish to recapture. And so in some cases, this is worth thousands of dollars to some people, tens of thousands of dollars to some people, certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars over a few decades of time. And then multi-generationally, it's huge. So the idea is to show somebody how to permanently keep their money or their fish, even after they think that they've spent it on some of those significant purchases that we all have. Make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, okay. Appreciate that.
Yeah, there's a picture that I use to help people understand we're talking about new ideas. This picture, in fact, why don't you describe the picture for the audience?
Yeah, so it's of a couple individuals, appears to be a husband and wife working together. The wife has a lightning rod. She's capturing, as it appears, lightning bolts. And the husband is holding a few jars full of lightning bolts. And so it looks like they have almost, as it were, a lightning farm.
Yeah. Now, we look at this, and obviously we know what's going on here is impossible. Somebody's not going to hold a lightning rod, capture lightning, and put it in a bottle, right? So our first impression is that this is impossible. It might not mean a lot to me, but the whole principle here is to remind us that the things that we look at that we might consider impossible, the idea of recapturing the fish, recapturing money, we might not understand how. We might think that it's impossible, but if we look around in this room, there are some glass jars that essentially are holding electricity, right?
Yeah, well, you call them light bulbs, I assume you were referring
exactly.
to.
So Thomas Edison took some ideas and he worked hard to create something that was impossible up until he knew that it was possible. He strongly believed that it was possible. And it took him a lot of time and effort to prove that it was possible, but he already believed that it was. So if people believe they can be more financially free, my job is just to show them the way how, okay?
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so would you read this out loud for our audience? This sentence here, he's going to read it twice, and then those of you listening or watching, you can read it kind of in your head after he's read this a couple of times. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, it says finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of many years. Oh, and again, finished files are the result of years of scientific study combined with the experience of many years. I thought it was one of those where it had like 2 words. I was reading it slowly because like, okay, does this have like those 2 words that if you read it too fast, you're going to just say it once and you're not really reading it right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so if you heard that, repeat that in your own mind, and then ask yourselves how many times the letter F appears in that sentence.
So finish, there's 1. Finished files, 2, are the result of years of scientific, right? There's 3. Study combined with the experience of many years. And I just noticed there's an of at the end, right? So there's 4.
Okay.
The more I look, the more I see. There's another 2 ofs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
two more Fs.
Very good. When I go through this live with somebody, most people read through this and they find the first 3 Fs just like you did. And most of us forget the word of in there, because when we're taught to read the word of, it's just one of those words we read visually, like a lot of other short words in the English language, right? And we're taught to just recognize those on sight. And in our mind, because of the way we say of, we think V, not F. It doesn't jump out to us like an F jumps out in finished, files, and scientific, right? So truth is, most of us are taught to look at finance and the means of financing our lives in a certain way. And because of how we're taught to look at it, we miss out on opportunities to recapture what was ours initially. We spend and we save, but we don't focus on recapturing. Okay? All right. Here's another quick little thing. Do you know the real reason that banks have drive-up windows?
Because they like to be friendly. They like to see a face-to-face.
They like to see a face. Banks are very friendly. They want us to come in there as often as they can get us in there. Maybe the real reason that banks have drive-up windows, though, is so that the real owner of the car gets to see it on occasion. Maybe they're sitting in there thinking, hey, wait a second, didn't we just buy a Corvette? I'm not driving it, where is that thing, right? So most of us say that I went out and bought a car. And when somebody asks me, when somebody tells me that, hey, I went and bought a new car, I have to ask them, did you? Yeah, I did. I went down and I shopped around and I found this and that's the one I decided to buy. Okay, so you bought it? And it takes them a minute to realize what I'm asking and what they're really saying, right? But we say that all the time, and we don't mean it.
Yeah, you're using somebody else's money.
And we're using somebody else's car. To prove that point, all we have to do is stop making that monthly payment, and the owner of that car will come and get it. They know who owns it, okay?
I was actually having a similar conversation with, I have a family member who runs a number of businesses. He does a lot of commercial finance and or commercial investing, I guess is the way to say it. And he talked about this property that they had purchased, and this one guy, they brought in this guy to run it, and this guy that was running it wasn't doing such a good job, but he had understood that because he was running it, he was almost the owner. I mean, in his mind, he was kind of the owner of the place, right? They brought him in to almost fill that role, and he's an uncle of mine comes in. Him and his board of financiers, right, came in and said, nope, we're taking you out. He said, but I've been running that. I mean, I'm kind of the owner. They said, no. We're the ones who paid for it. We're the ones who put our money into it. That's we have the financial interest in this project right here, and you're not doing a good job, so you're out. And so I think that's a powerful point, is that a lot of times we feel like we're the owner, but are we really? Right?
Yeah. And simply because we use the wrong word, or we change, we slightly alter the definition of words. And in fact, last week you guys talked about inflation a lot, and people think that inflation is simply, most of the time, they think it just means that prices go higher. But in reality, the root of inflation, the idea of inflating anything, has nothing to do with prices going up. And most of us forget that a supply of something is inflated, meaning it's getting bigger. And anyway, I was reading through a book this last week that I've really enjoyed. Nelson Nash's second book, Building Your Warehouse of Wealth. And in that book, he talks about how so many of us have gotten to this point regarding our thinking, the way we look at money, the way we look at storing money and using money. And in that book, he outlines pretty well for us the different things that have happened in our past as a country over the last number of years, 40-ish years maybe, 50 years maybe. Well, regardless, he lays out these different things that have happened that have caused us as a society to look at things differently and to call things maybe what they're not. One of his examples, in fact, is kind of interesting, is the Korean conflict, or at the time I think it was pitched as a police action, because Congress has to declare war. Congress didn't want to declare war, so instead we engaged in a police action. And you talk about the 58,000 people who died in that police action, and for those who were involved in it, I bet it felt like war.
Yeah.
Right? People I speak, you can find people alive and well today who were involved in the Korean conflict, and they'll tell you it was war. But we work around those things, and Nelson starts there, and he goes through these different examples where people just called something by the wrong name. So most of us have been taught to look at money incorrectly and management of money incorrectly, the way that we use it and what we can do with it. We have these fish coming in and we have fish going out. We don't talk about how to keep more fish. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about where to put the fish so that they can propagate fully on their own. So to
your point, I was actually just thinking that, I was looking back at my life, school, everything else, they teach you how to make fish. But that's about it. They
how to earn those fish.
Yeah. I mean, they're teaching you how to fish,
yep.
which is not. I mean, you look at the old Chinese proverb, you think, okay, yeah, they're doing what they're not giving you fish, they're teaching you how to fish.
Yep.
But they never teach you how to recapture the fish.
Yeah. To your point of making fish reminds me of Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, where he tells a story as a kid of making money. Because he was told he had to go make money, so they actually cast coins. Do you remember that?
Oh, no.
Yeah, he and his friend, they made molds, and they actually cast coins.
Wow.
Because he was told that you've got to go make money. He had this idea of making money, and so they literally made money. So, but you're right. We're taught how to be good employees. We're taught to go get a job and earn the daily bread, the daily fish or whatever, right?
Right.
Okay. So what I try to teach people is something, a concept and ideas that have been around a very, very long time. Easily within our country, these ideas have been around for a couple of centuries. Predates a lot of other good ideas that have been in vogue the last 40, 50 years regarding financial advising. So it's something that banks have known about, wealthy families have known about for quite some time. If we get right down to it, I can teach somebody how to create their own financing system that will allow them to recapture that money. There's a lot of things that it's not. It has nothing to do with investing. It's 100% about money management and controlling the flow of money that goes through our lives. And it is something that the banks essentially bank on. It's a process that banks have put in practice for a very, very long time. You might remember, hopefully some of the listeners do, some of you might be old enough, otherwise do some Google searching. The name Wachovia, the Wachovia Bank, do you remember
that? Yeah.
Okay. So it's been, man, time flies when you're having fun, and this is a fun career for me, so I don't remember how long it's been, but I'm going to go back and say it's been 12-ish years probably since the Wachovia Bank was in trouble and looking at bankruptcy possibly.
So I don't know that, you never hear about a bank going bankrupt, right? I mean,
yeah, you have to look for it.
It can't happen, I mean, it obviously doesn't happen very often.
No?
So, am I wrong? Now I don't know that I'm not so sure about that now, the way that you look at me. But it doesn't feel like, I mean, you don't just see banks go out of business all the time, right? Like other businesses, you hear, one out of every, I don't know what the statistic is, 1 out of every 10 or maybe it's 100 businesses don't make it. Well, banks seem to do pretty well.
Yep. Just as an aside, they're probably doing pretty well. The government gives them a lot of money. But interestingly enough, if you go back to the last financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and look online for that list of bank closures in 2008, and the list will astound you.
Really? I'm going to have to do that now.
Yep. But go ahead. You don't hear about it all the time.
No, yeah, I mean, that's just my point is that,
Okay.
I mean, you're talking here about a bank. So this is obviously an event that was
That
probably
happens.
a pretty big event, right? I mean,
Oh,
Wachovia, I remember,
Yeah.
was a pretty big bank.
Oh, yes,
It was,
yes.
pretty huge. So now we're talking about how you mentioned it's going to go out of business.
Yeah, and other banks, other financial institutions are looking at maybe purchasing their assets and their liabilities, right? They themselves were not able to manage what they had on the books, but Wells Fargo figured that they probably could. So Wells Fargo came in and bought out Wachovia Bank. Now, part of the reason, one of the main reasons that Wells Fargo was looking at Wachovia, even with all that debt they had, bad business on the books, they wanted to buy in because Wachovia had $14 billion with a B, $billion in Tier 1 assets.
So Tier 1, I don't understand that.
Good question. We'll get to that in just
Okay.
1 minute. $14 billion Tier 1 assets. The banks have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. I don't remember if there's something beyond that. Most importantly, the Tier 1 assets are listed as liquid and completely safe and provides tax-free growth for whoever owns that asset. Okay? So $14 billion of Tier 1 assets. Safe, liquid, tax-free growth. And Wells Fargo's looking at this thinking, holy cow, what can we do with $14 billion of liquid assets?
Yeah.
And-
so liquid meaning that they can use it
Yeah.
for investments.
Yeah, however the heck they want.
Yeah, okay.
But it's something they can get their hands on and have access to right away. $14 billion that they can get their hands on right away. And so Wells Fargo's looking at the situation saying, well, we have our own liabilities. If we take on all of Wachovia's liabilities, we have to pay out those obligations. And what can we do with $14 billion? Can we renegotiate some of those obligations and use that $14 billion for some growth, or just liquidate things? I don't know what they decided to do in the end, of course, but that's the main reason that they bought it.
I guess the point then is that when you have liquid money, you have options.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great point to make. When I was working with, in my insurance business, working primarily with retirees, one of the concepts I wanted them to understand is that at 65, getting close to retiring, you don't want to lock too many things up. Leave yourself some flexibility and some options, because 20 years later, when you're 85, those options, it might be the difference between staying home or being in a facility, or you just want to be able to maneuver as life changes, right?
So you're sitting here talking, and I'm listening and comparing it to what we've been taught. Not the common teaching out there is, hey, you got to get a house, you got to pay off your house, you got to put money into a 401k, IRA, and all these things lock up your money, right?
Yep.
All these things that we've been taught all our lives make it so that we don't have liquid wealth or liquid assets available.
Correct.
Right?
It's interesting that we're taught to do what banks and financial advisors tell us to do. We are not taught to do what they do. Because banks don't do that. Wealthy families don't do that. Wealthy individuals don't do that.
Interesting.
Yep. Okay, so let's say for a minute that I'm the greatest financial advisor in the world.
Which you are.
Not a financial advisor at all, actually.
Yeah,
Let's throw that out there. Technically, I'm not one of those certified financial advisors. I give good advice, though, regarding how to finance. Okay, so if I if I am one of the greatest, I maybe need to change the script there actually. Let's suppose that I'm able to double your money. And just to keep the math simple, we're going to say that you give me $1 and I double that dollar every year for 20 years, okay?
So 100% increase.
Yes, every single year.
Okay.
So $1 turns into 2, 2 turns into 4, 4 turns into 8, 8 into 16, so on and so forth, okay?
Okay.
Now I'm going to do that. This is important. I'm going to double that dollar without it being taxed, without the growth being taxed.
Cool.
Yep, very, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, now, would you guess, and take a minute, the rest of you out there listening, would you guess how much money you might have after 20 years?
After 20 years, just once a year, doubling just once a year, not
Yep.
monthly, no
Yep,
compounding,
just annual interest.
doubling. One, two,
It is
4.
compounding.
Well, okay. So,
If the mathematician was here, I don't know if he could figure it out either. It's not
I don't
something we do in our heads, most of us.
$100,000.
Okay, that's a good guess.
I'm
He made
actually
a
being
guess.
optimistic.
The rest of you make a guess as well. And we need to restart that timer over there, would you? Yep. Hit the button again like you did. There you go. Thanks. Okay, so the rest of you out there, make a guess as well. Take a minute if you want. If that doubles every year without tax coming out, read that number off for everybody.
1,048,576. I was way off.
Most of us are way
10
off.
times off.
We're all way off when we guess. $1 million, over $1 million, just by doubling money, okay? So, 100% increase, that's pretty darn good. Nobody out there is getting it, so I would have to be the best in
And you
order
just
to
started
do
with
that.
$1.
You just
Man,
started with $1,
that's-
yeah, over 20
Oh,
years.
man.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
But it's 100% increase without
Yeah.
tax, okay? All right,
Okay.
so most of the people I work with do not have money sitting someplace where it's not subject to tax. So let's say that I'm giving them 100% growth, but now it's being taxed. And let's say it's being taxed at a rate of 17%. Any
Okay.
guesses on what the number would be?
So if we take 17% of, I'm just gonna, I know you're gonna, you have some kind of surprise in mind here, so I'm just gonna actually look at what 1,048,576
I love it.
times, so 17%, so we're looking at, that's 83%, right? So times 0.83 equals, so we should have, if the government were to take 17%, we should have $870,318, right?
Okay,
I mean, it
if
should
it
be
was-
somewhere close there.
If it was taxed at the end, so if it was 17% off the top after 20 years,
But they don't do that.
correct,
It's
most of
every
the
year.
time.
Yeah.
Most of the time, depending on the vehicle that's used. But if the growth is taxed every year at a rate of 17%, okay? So that we take $1, we add $1 to it, and that new dollar is taxed at 17%. So we only get 83% of that new dollar, okay?
Got it. So
Right,
you're
so
only
it's
doubling.
It's diminished every
83%.
year.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, any idea what the number would be? Any guesses?
500,000.
Okay, good guess. Try $177,000.
Wow, that's a little closer to what my first guess
Yeah.
was in doubling.
That's not how much is
Maybe the
gone.
government trains our minds so much. Oh, if we double this, well, we got to take out taxes, you know. But 177,428. That's not a lot.
How much is left. Correct.
Wow.
If the growth is taxed at 17%. Now, most successful business owners,
They're not
high
17%.
income- exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And so maybe the next number I run through, and these numbers can change really easily, and based on current tax rates, it would change. I'm just going to leave this the way that it is because tax rates change with the stroke of a pen. Okay. But if it was 27% tax annually,
Wow.
yeah, $57,000.
57,666. See, that's what happens when the government gets involved.
Yeah. So we're left with $57,666 at the end of 20 years. Okay. So the next question I ask people is exactly how important is that rate of return?
Well, it doesn't seem as important anymore when it's. Sounds like if you can get away from taxes, that's the
Yeah.
the real money.
Yeah. Next time we have Jaron on, maybe we ought to run the numbers, and let's say that the growth was cut in half, only 50%, and taxes were cut in half. And so maybe somebody did save 50% on taxes, but their growth was only 50%, not 100. We'd have to see how the reduction in taxes might outpace higher growth someplace else, okay?
That'd be interesting.
You're absolutely right. The point here is that, holy cow, maybe the rate of return is not the end-all be-all. But as we're working in the financial realm, myself, my colleagues, and Nelson told us this from the very beginning. You get people together at a backyard cookout or something, and money comes up, finances come up, they might talk about the interest they're paying on a certain loan or a car that they bought or something of that nature, but quite often they talk about the rate of return they're getting on their investments, and they like to discuss latest, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing, right?
Yeah, that's
you hear that all the time.
only thing people think about. We're taught that the rate of return is king, and we have to chase that rate of return. And a lot of people end up putting money at greater risk in order to chase that higher rate of return.
And what we're talking about here, because I'm going back to what you said previously about how this is not an investment strategy. This is a strategy on, what would you say? How do you define that?
How you manage your money.
How you manage your wealth, right? And
Yep.
so
Manage
it's
the
not, so you're taking this strategy, this management strategy, and you're saying, okay, here's how you manage it, and then you take that money and you're able to invest.
Absolutely.
And that's when, when you invest, obviously you do want a high rate of return,
Absolutely.
right? That's what investing is for.
Yep.
But what are we doing with our money outside of that investment strategy? Are we just letting it sit there and be subject to taxes and so many other things?
And
right?
even if we have money earning an investment somewhere, we still have other money that we are just spending, and we're not recapturing any of it. Sometimes what we're earning at an investment isn't enough to offset what we are losing somewhere else. And so the net is a wash, maybe. Or maybe we go backwards, or maybe we gain, but we're not gaining as much because we forget about how much we're losing somewhere else, because we don't understand how much we're losing. We don't understand that we are transferring money out of our circle of wealth. I've made reference to that. Transferring money out of our circle of wealth unnecessarily, unknowingly. And it's simply because, like at the very beginning, we read that sentence, we don't realize there's 6 F's in there. Because of the way we're taught to see things, we miss out on these opportunities. Okay, so
Makes sense.
yeah, my job, just to teach people. One of my favorite quotes goes back to a Supreme Court justice between 1916 and 1939.
I heard you tell this before, and so as you were going through this example, I was thinking, oh man, that quote that you told me way back when, that makes so much more sense now. So I'm excited actually that you're going to tell this quote, because it's become one that I think about all the time now. So yeah.
Yeah, it paints such a wonderful picture. So Louis Brandeis, the quote reads, "I live in Alexandria, Virginia. Near the court chambers is a toll bridge across the Potomac. When in a rush, I pay the $1 toll and get home early. However, I usually drive outside the downtown section of the city and cross the Potomac on a free bridge. The bridge was placed outside the downtown Washington, D.C. area to serve a useful social service, getting drivers to drive the extra mile and help alleviate congestion during the rush hour. If I went over the toll bridge and through the barrier without paying a toll, I would be committing tax evasion. If I drive the extra mile and drive outside the city of Washington to the free bridge, I'm using a legitimate, logical, and suitable method of tax avoidance. And I'm performing a useful social service by doing so. For my tax evasion, I should be punished. For my tax avoidance, I should be commended. The tragedy in life today is that so few people know that the free bridge even exists."
So here's a U.S. Supreme Court justice making this comment, and I think that a lot of us, when we say, when we make the point, hey, so the real issue here isn't rate of return, but how to avoid paying taxes. Now, again, we're not talking about tax avoidance, right? We're talking about tax. We are talking about tax avoidance, not tax evasion, right? And so what we're talking about is completely legal. There's absolutely no reason not to do it. There's nothing immoral about it. And anyway, so I just love that quote. I think it's a great example.
It's a great one. And so again, if you want to understand tax choices and understand where that free bridge is and how to use that free bridge, that's why we're here, right? And certain families, certain individuals, certain businesses have been using this for literally, it's been at least 200 years in our country, okay? But it's not been around for only 200 years. It wasn't like that's when it was new. There are some books that I recommend, books that I've got on my shelf at the office, and I recommend everybody to read one of these and then get back with me so that we're communicating on a higher plane of intelligence. Because typical financial advice has us thinking a certain way. In fact, one of my colleagues, Kim Butler, wrote a book as a financial advisor herself. She's been in the industry at this point 25 or so years. And her latest one was Confessions of a Financial Advisor. I forget exactly the title. But she admits that for all these years I didn't understand some things. I was just your typical financial advisor, and she did a good job with it. But now she's in a position where she's able to write a book and help us understand why typical financial advice has failed us. And it truly has. The industry's been around 40 or 50 years is all. So we need to think about things differently. And after reading one of these books, a person is better prepared to have more important conversations that go beyond typical financial advice. And I'm not here to say that some of that advice is not good advice, because it is. People should be pursuing investments. People should be looking at some opportunities outside of what I teach. But as far as managing money, managing the flow of money through our lives to cover expenses, to fund investments, that should be managed a different way.
So in other words, what you're saying is that if somebody is looking at investing, if somebody is, wants to set their life up for success later on, talk to us first, right? Talk to you first in terms of setting up the system first before you ever get into investing, because you want to make sure that you have that money in a position that, if you're investing, great, and you get this great rate of return, but we want to make sure that it's in a system that's going to allow you to recapture as much of that fish as possible.
Yeah, it's an easier way. Well, it's a way to passively increase your wealth, passively increase a person's estate, and still fund aggressive investments if they want, fund whatever it is they want, reduce their tax liability. Okay, so we talk to business owners, and the big triggers for business owners are finding ways to recapture their overhead expenses and limit their tax liability. For families, maybe they want to increase their wealth, protect their estate, or transfer their estate to the next generation. Another way to manage the family wealth, okay? So there's a way for us to get some money back. Some of the money we spend in taxes and interest specifically, there's a way for us to recapture some of that money currently being spent. And most of the time people say, hey, show me how to do that. I've never had somebody come to me and say, I want to pay more in taxes. I want to pay more in interest. Teach me how to do that. I have had a few people tell me that I'm not interested in earning more money, or I'm not interested in doing better than I'm doing right now. And I think it was just because, I don't know, they didn't trust me. They didn't read a book. They just figured I was some kid who was, I don't really know. I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to them afterwards. But most folks want to know about it right away. So this is kind of a place where a person will make that decision and decide that they want to learn more, and they might spend another half hour with me or so to learn and to get into the details of it all. So, do we want to pause and start the next one? And start podcast numero dos?
We can, so just go ahead and end this one, and then we'll start the next one. Do you
Okay.
have time? What time is it?
Yeah.
I have an interview in 15 minutes.
Oh, well
I can
then
do
we
too.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, get to the interview then.
Yeah, so we'll
This-
just end this one. I'm going to leave this set up for us,
Okay.
so
Okay.
we can.
I kind of paused and drug out the word so. If you go back
I'll
to
go
that,
back and edit
delete
that.
the last minute, whatever. Okay. So then we will invite people to tune in or something, and we'll end the podcast.
Okay.
Nice job, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So at this point, a person normally will want to meet longer, spend another 30 minutes with me, or They will buy a book, spend 3-4 hours reading a book, studying a book, finding all the questions, coming up with all the questions they can, getting back together with me. Nelson wrote that first book based on his outline for a 10-hour series, a 10-hour total, but it was a seminar. When I attended those seminars, he broke them into a Friday evening and then like an all-day Saturday.
Yeah.
Initially, I think he did 2-hour blocks with couples and folks for 5 weeks or something like that. But anyway, long story short, read a book, contact me, let's get together again. The next podcast will go through the second half of this presentation and get into more detail of how a person will go through that process and how the math actually adds up. We compare the purchase of a car, different ways of financing versus actually purchasing and owning a car, but different ways of having access to a car that is going to be purchased every 4 years. Okay, so for you listening or watching, it might be a good idea if you want to have a calculator handy, have a pencil and paper handy, write down these numbers. If you've got questions about those numbers, reach out to us. Put something in the comment of the video or reach out to us by email. And questions, concerns, complaints, if you want to go through it because you think you're right and we're wrong, please bring it on. I cannot tell you how many thousands of people have ran these numbers, and initially they look at it and say, no, I don't understand how that happens. Sometimes they don't understand it. Sometimes they just want to dispute it with us. But these numbers, this exact math we're going to go through, is actually in Nelson's book that he published over 20 years ago.
And I think they sometimes want to dispute it because it's contrary to what society is taught for a long time. You know, what they've learned in school. In some ways, right? Because it's not that it's contrary to, it's just that they're not taught.
Oh, it's flat out contrary in some circles.
There you
Absolutely.
Go.
Yeah. There are some people out there who beat on this concept. And it's tough to argue with something that has been around in this country over 200 years. It's very, very tough to argue with it from a mathematical perspective when you look at the numbers on a sheet. And I'll put in the numbers the person tells me to put in, and it'll be fair. They can compare things left and right, different ways of managing money. This is not an investment. But when compared to other methods of managing the flow of money through our lives, nothing does what this does. So tune in next time. We'll get into the details and help you understand how to use this just to buy a new car every 4 years. Well, today's number's used, but still.
And let me just throw out there too, as far as if you do want to get in contact with us and you want some additional information, you want us to send you some information, you just want to discuss some points, have some questions, feel free to use, I'm just going to throw out an email that I check all the time, and I can pass the information along to Matt, is info@ibsolutions.org. Again, that's info@IB, standing for Integrity Business Solutions, so ibsolutions.org. And feel free to send an email there, send your questions. Do you want to give out the phone number in case you want to?
Yes, which one? We've actually discussed this before. Which number do we give out? We haven't set one up for that necessarily.
Yeah, we haven't.
We're going to get one. And most people honestly do a lot on the computer nowadays anyway.
Yeah.
My email is matt@yourfinancingsystem.com. And send it to either one. If you've got a question more for me versus Eric, and then we are very, very close to having the Facebook, the Instagram, Twitter account under the name Common Sense Conversations, so that people can have conversations there about the topics we're discussing as well. Beat us up all you want. It'll give us fodder for the next podcast. And if we've got to embed videos in Facebook, for example, where we go through something, we are more than happy to do it.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us again, Common Sense Conversations. I'm Eric.
I'm Matt. Bye.
Bye.